How you doing, guys? Ricky from Average Eskate Review. So in this one we're going to be doing a first impressions of the Ownboard Bamboo. Now you're probably going to think that this board looks very similar to another board that we particularly like, which is the Bamboo GTR. So that's definitely going to be for another video, but this one's just going to be a first impressions of what we think about the Ownboard Bamboo. So before we jump into the video, if you haven't subscribed, consider doing so to stay up to date of all the videos that we post. So let's jump into this one. Now, looking at this board, it's comprised of a very nice flexible bamboo deck with double kingpin trucks and 6-inch AT wheels. Now, the deck on this thing is really nice. It's sort of got a drop down to it, got a lovely bit of flex to it, and generally it's, from what I've ridden on it, it seems very nice to carve, to just go over all terrain with it. It's got a nice amount of flex to it, good position to put your feet in to keep you stable. So overall, the deck's been really nice. Now, like I said, it's got the double kingpin trucks on it. Again, I really am a fan of double kingpin trucks. Going back to another skateboard with just standard trucks opposed to the double kingpins just doesn't feel right anymore. It just feels like I can't turn as much, and it just feels very restricted. So I'm definitely glad to see that it's got the double kingpin trucks on it. Another thing I'd like to point out is the bushings on this board are quite soft, but not real soft, so they're sort of about in the middle somewhere there. Normally when a board gets shipped out to us, it's got really stiff bushings on it, and I, being a light rider myself, find it very hard to be able to loosen the trucks enough to be able to carve and turn with the board in general. So it's great to see that Ownboard have put some softer bushings on to cater for my size of rider. And one thing I'd like to mention, obviously going back to the trucks, from what I've ridden of the board, the trucks don't feel as dialed in as I'd like them to be. Obviously, I'm going to have to spend a little bit more time finessing them to get them to the way that I like to ride. But just off the bat, first couple of rides on it, it does seem like there's almost a secondary moment as you're carving. You'll go to carve out, and then all of a sudden you think you're going to come back in, and there's just that extra kick out. So it's something I'm going to have to adjust to, tweak them a little bit more, but it's something I just thought I'd mention. Now, taking a look at the remote that comes with the Ownboard Bamboo, it's Hobbywings remote, and the one that we actually received, because our board is not a final production board, shall we say, it's more of a demo board. It did have the original remote, which doesn't have an LED or OLED screen on it to be able to see speed, miles per hour that you're going, your battery percentage and all the rest of that sort of information. The newer remotes, if you use to purchase them from Ownboard's own website or Slick Revolution's website, they will be shipping out with the new remotes with the OLED screen on them. So the remote that we've got at the moment is Hobbywings' previous version of the remote that they are currently shipping boards out with. Now, the remote that we've got's got 3 modes on it: slow, medium and fast, because if you've probably seen the videos, you know now that me and Chris like to have our boards in the fastest mode to be able to just ride anywhere, ride as fast as we possibly can everywhere we go. So I actually like the remote. I don't mind the remote. It reminds me and feels a little bit like the Boosted Stealth remote or the Boosted Board remotes that were out there. So for me personally, I actually quite like the way that it feels in the hand, and the scroll wheel's got just the right amount of tension for accelerating and braking on it. So the Ownboard Bamboo is using Hobbywings ESC, and it's running a 10S4P battery configuration in it, which brings me on nicely actually to accelerating and braking. Now, I've always got a big issue with a lot of these boards that are shipping out there with the Hobbywing ECU on there, because basically the acceleration is just not aggressive enough for me. It's way too soft, and it just takes too long to pick up to top speed. And I don't want to keep referencing or going on about Evolve boards, but if you've ever ridden one, especially the GTR, you will know that when you put your foot down, or finger on the trigger down, should I say, you are going to fly and really feel a kick. With the Hobbywing ECU that are in a lot of these other board manufacturers out there, they're just not aggressive enough. It just doesn't give me that kick, that poke that I'm looking for. So, I mean, I guess for the price and all the rest of it, then I have to take that into consideration, but I would like the acceleration to just be a little bit more aggressive. Now, when we look at the braking for me has actually been pretty good. When you are sort of flying down there at top speed and you pull the brake back, it is very soft, and a few instances we've had to turn to avoid hitting something because the board just hasn't slowed down in time. But at lower speeds, if you're just carving and you just want to come to an abrupt standstill, then it works perfectly fine. So still need to ride it a little bit more just to see how the brakes are performing, but from what I've ridden it so far, the brakes at high speeds aren't that great. So some of the specifications on this board, you're looking at around 24 miles per hour, 19 miles of range, can climb up to a 30% gradient of hill, and charge times roughly around 4 to 5 hours, which is bit long for me. Feels like an eternity for the board to charge. Okay, so overall, final thoughts on the board from just riding it a handful of times is I don't think it's a bad board, especially the price that it comes into. Chris will obviously go into a little bit more detail about the pricing of this board, but from my personal experience of riding it, my first impressions, it does seem to be an okay board. So I'll hand you over to Chris now so he can go through a little bit more of his experiences and a few other bits and pieces. So I'll see you in the next one, guys.
Hey guys, Chris from Average Eskate Reviews here. And taking over from Ricky's side, me giving a little bit of feedback on what my first impressions of the Ownboard Bamboo have been like. Now, first things first, what I want to do is talk about all of the things that I really liked about this board before I go into some of the things that I wasn't too fond of. First things first is the general appearance of the board, the deck, the size of the motors, the fact that we were very fortunate enough to receive one of Ownboard's Bamboo series of boards that has the bamboo exposed rather than the ones that have been painted black. Straight off the bat, I think this looks 10 times better than the ones that are painted black. I'd rather have a black board reserved for a board that uses composite materials like the carbon. So it was nice to have a board that looked the way it did. I will mention that the one that we had was a demo board, so excuse the grip tape that was on it. That's of course something that you wouldn't get if you were to buy this board from either Slick Revolution in the UK or from Ownboard's direct website. So if anyone was wondering about why our board looks so different to the ones advertised, that's why. Now, when we get into the general ride of the board, the first thing that I'll touch on is the drop-down deck is something that I haven't had as much experience of as I would like to have had. I've ridden a few boards that have drop-down decks, and this instance of my general feedback of this particular board was great. You feel like you do have a better sense for the road. I definitely think that you can carve much harder, much tighter, more aggressively with that drop-down deck. And your general balance on the board is better because you're closer to the ground, lower center of gravity, and it's very similar to the carbon GTR board from Evolve in terms of the deck with the lip on the bottom and also rather the back of the board and the lip on the front, which means that without looking down at your feet, you know where your feet are. You know when you're getting close to the rear wheels, and it helps to be able to have a general understanding of how your feet are positioned on a board. But for braking, accelerating, going fast, and also carving very hard, I really, really like that style of deck. Now, looking at other points of the general ride, going over rough terrain, I will mention that we were riding this board with the all-terrain wheels, which are airless. And if you've watched our podcasts, you've watched our videos before, you know that we're not fond of airless AT wheels. I think personally that it defeats the purpose of having an all-terrain wheel if you remove the inner tube, because your grip, the general control that you have over the board is minimized by having a solid core. Now, people do, or manufacturers do, lots of things like adding different patterning around the outside of the wheel to make it softer, to make it much more comfortable to be able to ride, but nothing beats having an inner tube versus not having an inner tube. So if you're wondering what our perspective is on AT wheels that don't have inner tubes or have solid cores, not a fan. I think that they underperform on smooth roads and they underperform on rough surfaces, but that's my own take, my own personal opinion. In terms of what you get from this board riding around normal streets, going over the normal terrain that we ride on, it's, I will say, definitely better than what we experienced with, for example, the Vesta board or the V-Star board. The wheels that Ownboard have for their AT version of these wheels that they've created are much better than what we're normally used to seeing with solid AT wheels. But again, like I said, you just cannot beat an AT wheel with an inner tube. You can't. My biggest irritation with these wheels is that even from the video footage that you'll see, you can't push your carving to the limits that I'd like to be able to push it to, like if I was using wheels that had inner tubes. Not necessarily from Evolve, because I know that's what you guys are very used to us saying, or we're trying to stay away from that as much as we can, but you need to bear in mind that Ownboard have created two boards that are basically cheaper versions of the Evolve GTR series, so it's very difficult to not reference them when we talk about the boards in any capacity. But the problem with their airless AT wheels is that on hard surfaces, you just don't have anywhere near as much bite or grip on the ground or the road. You can carve very deeply, especially because of that drop-down deck, but even from some of the footage that you'll see, as I was getting into my carves, I wasn't as comfortable or as haphazardous as I would be if I was using the 7-inch AT wheels from Evolve, which have inner tubes, or the 6-inch, because if I pushed the carve out too far to either side, it would slide out. And there was instances where I did try and get a little bit brave with my carving and the back end just completely slid out and there was nothing I could do about it. But if you're looking to slide or power slide in AT wheels, these are definitely the ones to do it with. As you guys know, sliding a board out is only something that I've picked up over the last couple of weeks. You know that I've been doing it a lot in the Stoke, which has the Orangutan 85mm street wheels. Sliding that out was, I'm not going to say easy, but it wasn't difficult to be able to master. It took me essentially maybe 2 or 3 days to be able to get it down. But then when I tried to transition onto doing that with the 6-inch AT wheels with inner tubes from Evolve's catalogue, or the 7-inch, I couldn't even get the board to slide out 90 degrees. The amount of speed you need, the amount of like comfort and low stance and leaning you need to be able to achieve to be able to get the wheels to slide out is insane. But then when I slapped on the Ownboard with the AT wheels, which are airless, sliding that board out was easier than sliding out the Stoke with street wheels, 85mm street wheels at that. All-terrain wheels are meant to be the most difficult wheels to slide out, but with the ones that have no inner tubes, it was easy. I mean, I was literally doing 180, go down the road, 180, go down the road, 180 without messing up. And that's, as a newbie with sliding, is something that I'd never expect to be able to do. So if you're looking at a board and you're looking for a wheel setup that you can carve with, and I mean savagely carve with, all-terrain wheels without an inner tube are just not it. But in terms of being able to ride with them and carve not too savagely, not too deeply, without too, lower stance, you can get some pretty good carves with them, but I just don't have anywhere near as much confidence as I would if it was a wheel that had an inner tube. Especially the fact that right now in the UK, my watch says it's 27 degrees, and I live in England. That's degrees Celsius. So this is like peak summer weather. So an all-terrain wheel on nice tarmac with peak summer heat, you'd expect to be able to grip like there was no tomorrow. But the all-terrain wheels without inner tubes, they just don't do that. And it's one of the most, I guess, important takeaways that you should take when you're considering an all-terrain wheel that has an inner tube versus one that doesn't. I can't imagine how badly these things would perform in the wet. But like I said, riding these all-terrain wheels just over general debris, if you're the type of rider that, doesn't carve too hard, going off and on curbs, riding over fairly harsh surfaces, even riding over short grass, dry mud, that type of stuff, this board will be able to deal with that just fine. You're going to get a lot more vibrations than you would with a wheel with an inner tube, but it can handle that. The torque of the board is good enough to be able to go over those surfaces. So if you're just looking for a board to get you from point A to point B without too much savagery in terms of your riding style, this will be completely fine. Now looking at the top speed of the Ownboard with the bamboo deck, I definitely feel like the top speed that they've given it is definitely one that's achievable. Of course, your build, the terrain you're riding on, the wind, the weather, all of that stuff comes into consideration. But 24 miles an hour with their wheels, the AT wheels, I think is definitely achievable. I'd probably cap the speed that I was averaging at somewhere between 22 and 23, 24 miles an hour. So pretty much in line with what they've suggested. In terms of the range, we've not really put enough miles on the board to be able to discuss the range, but the charge time, as Ricky mentioned in the video, was savage. We've left the board charging for hours during the morning, and every other board that we have would be done charging, the Ownboard would still be going. That's not really a big deal because if it can achieve somewhere close to 19 miles, then having to spend 4 to 5 hours charging the board isn't really a big deal, because I can't imagine people are going to be doing 19 miles, charging their board up and doing another 19 miles the next day. But yeah, food for thought. Now, when we look at the components of the Ownboard Bamboo, now this is definitely something that we always look at when we're looking at boards with different price points. Very surprised. In terms of the battery enclosure, it looks good. It's not kind of like hanging too low to come into contact with the ground unnecessarily. Of course, if you're going over big speed bumps or dropping off of curbs, there is a chance you might catch it, or if you take the board off road, there is a chance you might scratch the battery housing. But again, this is just the housing of the battery. You're not really doing any damage to the board itself, except from cosmetical damage. So I was very pleased with that. Looking at the motors, I've got to say the motors look amazing. They're massive, they're chunky, they're pretty powerful from what you would think considering the price point of the board. And also the belt covers are metal, the actual gears themselves are metal, which with a lot of boards that we've seen out there, including Evolve, all of these components are made from plastic or some sort of polymer. But having them made from metal when we were dismantling the board and changing the gear setups, I was very surprised because you know that these things are going to last. The general quality and construction of the board is so much better than I thought it would be. Even looking at the trucks, I expected this board to be very similar to the V-Star or the Vesta board, but the trucks just look thicker, more solid, more robust. The only thing that I was a little bit let down by was the bushings, which are a bit too soft for myself. I know that Ricky said that they were pretty much ideal for him, but he's essentially somewhere between 15 and maybe 16 kilograms lighter than I am. So for myself, the trucks were just a bit too soft. Even tightening them up to the max, they were still way too much play. If I loosened them more than I wanted to, there was a bit of speed wobble while I was pushing the board up to its limits in terms of top speed. So stiffer bushings or an option of bushings would be nice for them to include. There are multiple things that you can do to stiffen up your bushing, so it's not like it's a big deal. It's just one of those things that if you're a heavy rider, definitely consider that, because it could affect the way that you have a first impression or first experience of the board quite drastically. So just bear that in mind. Now, of course, the big thing with this board is going to be the price, because that's essentially what dictates a budget board, a mid-range board to a premium board. Now, if you're looking at picking up the Ownboard Bamboo in the UK from Slick Revolution, why I'm going to say that that's definitely something that you want to consider if you're in the UK. To be honest, it's the only place you should consider getting one if you want one from the UK, and that's because you get support if the board needs to be fixed, which, trust me, any electric skateboard, regardless of who's made it, is going to need general servicing, maintenance, and the odd part could break based on your riding or just based off of bad luck. But it's definitely worth picking up a board that you can have serviced in the country that you are in. If you're picking up the Bamboo from the UK from Slick Revolutions, currently when this video was filmed, it was £1,180. If you're looking at picking up the board directly from Ownboard, who are based somewhere in China, the board is roughly priced around £900. And once the board lands in the UK, there could be duties and handling costs to be able to process the board through to get it to your house. But for me personally, if I'm buying a board in the United Kingdom and I could pay essentially an extra few £100s to have UK support, UK servicing, UK warranty, why wouldn't you ever consider that? But if you look at the price compared to the GTRs, you are still saving a considerable amount of money. But one thing I'm going to say is that if you're looking for a cheaper version of an Evolve GTR, this just isn't it. I'm not going to go into too much detail because that needs to be saved for the review, but if you're looking at this board from the perspective of a bamboo board with a drop-down deck that has all-terrain wheels, that's good for carving, good top speed, good range, for the price, this is a great board. But if you're sitting there thinking, I want to pick up a GTR Carbon or a GTR Bamboo, and this is a cheaper alternative that's pretty much the same thing, it's not. Ricky touched on a few elements that make this board so different. The rear trucks versus the front trucks while you're carving, while you're riding, almost act independently from each other. The only way I can explain it is if you like cars, maybe consider driving like a Porsche 911 versus driving a limo. It sounds insane, but that's the best way that I could explain it. When I'm in the GTR Bamboo, or on it rather, and I'm carving, the front and back act together. They act in unison, so you know exactly how the board is going to react, aside from the soft, spongy deck. But now when you switch over to the Ownboard and its bamboo deck and its trucks and its bushings, the movements, the carving, the reaction almost feels like two separate components. They're not acting in unison, they're acting completely independently from each other. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, it's something you have to adjust to. But it's not the same thing. And this isn't me blowing smoke up Evolve's arse like a lot of you guys might think. You get such a great appreciation for companies like Evolve. I'm not saying that they're the best, I'm not saying that everyone needs to buy their product, but trying to create a cheaper version of them, and if you're thinking of the Ownboard as a solution to not being able to spend the extra few £100s to be able to get the Evolve, it's not the same thing, trust me. But aside from that, guys, hopefully this has helped to shed a little bit of light into what this board is like. As I said, for the price, very surprised with this board. More information will come in the review, but if you have any questions that we can also answer in the review, please leave them down below in the comment section. If you want links to be able to see where these boards are from, what they cost, what the spec is, where you can get them from, links down below in the video description. But as always, guys, thumbs up, subscribe. Thank you for watching this all the way to the end, and take care till next time. But before you go anywhere, we also have a podcast, and make sure that you also subscribe to this channel and follow us on Instagram. But thank you guys, and take care till next time.